Ah, well, I'm in bed. My chores are done for the night. Um, Rocky is having a sleep there beside me. He's fast asleep. I got the heater on, just on the low setting, to keep the dampness down out of here. Anyway, I've been thinking about my taxi driving days. I didn't drive a taxi for a long time, but I did drive one for a little while when I was in my early 20s in my hometown of Perth, Ontario, Canada. It was for a company that has long since gone defunct. It's been out of business for over 30 years now. I drove a taxi in 1990, and the company I drove for was called VaCab. THECAB. VaCab. Anyway, the car that I usually drove was a 1984 Buick LeSabre. Great big blue sedan. Beautiful car. We also had a 1980 Oldsmobile Delta 88. And we had a 1981 Chevrolet Impala. And we had a 1979 Chevrolet Caprice station wagon, which we used as a spare car. And we used to call it the Griswold Family Truckster wagon. It was ugly as sin, that car. And it had a bad speedometer cable. So as soon as you started to move, the speedometer would shoot up from 0 to like 120 kilometers per hour. As soon as you took your foot off the gas and the car started to roll forward, it would do that. And the power windows, it had power windows in it, but I remember you had to be careful because the windows would fall down inside the door. They'd be going up fine, and then all of a sudden window would do that and fall down inside the door and stuff. So yeah, it was a really rough old car anyway, but we only used it occasionally as a spare car. I only drove that car a handful of times, but anyway, we had that too. And actually, the 81 Impala was bought to replace it. And then the 81 Impala became our spare car. Because eventually the old Griswold family truckster wagon, it broke down once too often, so we just rotated the 81 Impala into the role of the spare car, and we got rid of the 79 Caprice there. It went for scrap, basically. It was in rough shape. Anyway, when I went to get my taxi license with the town of Perth, the cop who was in charge of those things was a fellow by the name of Dan Sisti. Dan Sisti had a hate on for me. Dan Sisti couldn't stand me. And he did everything he could to keep me from getting my taxi license. But he gave a taxi license with no issues at all to a man who had been, well, he wasn't just accused, he was convicted for sodomizing his 2-year-old son, a convicted sex offender. And he got a taxi license with no issues at all. And we had contracts to pick up children at the daycare center and to transport children to school and everything. I mean, it was not good anyway, to have a convicted sex offender driving a taxi cab. But anyway, they gave him a taxi license right away. I, on the other hand, had to wait a long time for mine. They did everything they could to stop me from being able to drive a taxi cab in Perth. Anyway, just because of a personality conflict is what it was. But I did eventually get it, and I was driving a taxi cab. I remember it made me mad when this other guy got his, because I didn't know at first what to make of him. I knew he was a con artist. I'd figured that out. he was talking really big. He was claiming that he owned a construction company and this and that, and I didn't believe a word of it, you know. But I could tell he was pretending to be somebody he wasn't, which told me that whoever he is, he doesn't want us to know who he is. And so I just immediately took a dislike to him. And then that dislike grew into just an out and out. I just ended up despising the guy because of some of the things that he would do. He would steal our calls from us because we all could hear on the radio, and there's a kind of an unwritten rule in the taxi driver world. You don't take another man's call from him. That's his bread and butter. You wait and you get your call and you take your call, but you don't take the other man's call. That's a serious thing when you drive a taxi cab. It's a huge no-no. And if you want to make an enemy of your fellow driver, there's no better way to do it than to take his fare away from him. And he'd do that. He'd race there. He'd get there ahead of us, ahead of me or ahead of whoever else was working. And we'd pull into the yard, and the people would be getting into his car. Oh, it used to make us mad, you know. Anyway, that was one thing that he used to do. One time, see, now only me and one other driver, who wasn't this guy, there was another driver too, that had keys to everything. Myself and one of the other drivers had keys to the entire fleet of cars. So what that meant is that I could go down to the gas station that we worked out of. If I needed to, I could go down there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I could just get into and drive off in whatever was parked there. Basically, you know, if I needed to, I could do that. I had access to all the vehicles all the time. Provided that another driver wasn't using the vehicle, I had access to it. And I was only one of two drivers that had that kind of access. The other drivers only had keys to the car they were driving when they were driving it. At the end of their shift, they were required to turn their keys in. And, you know, they weren't allowed to take cars home, which I was, and so was this one other driver. And the thing is, we did a lot of the runs where you had to get up like at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning to take people to work and stuff. So that was the reason why we were allowed to bring cars home with us. Anyway, I used to drive the 1984 Buick LeSabre. That was generally my car. That was car 104. So that was also my call sign on the radio. If dispatch said 104, you know, car 104 or whatever, then I knew to pick up the microphone that was me they were looking for. Anyway, so I knew to answer that. So you get, you know, base to 104. That was me. And unless I was driving one of the other cars, but I was almost always driving the 84 Buick. That just kind of became my car. Anyway, I was brought the car home one night, you know, drove the last drunk home at 2 o'clock in the morning, brought the car home, parked it out in front of my building downtown in Perth, go up to my apartment to get a couple hours of sleep, 2 or 3 hours of sleep. I had to be in Lanark at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, Lanark is a village north of Perth. It's about a half-hour drive from Perth. And I had to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning to pick a man up to bring him into Perth to go to work. So I had about two hours in which to sleep. Anyway, I go upstairs and I go to bed. I just fall into my bed exhausted. And I got my alarm set, so I'll be up in a couple hours to pick this guy up and take him to work. Well, I go downstairs at like 20 after 4 in the morning. No car. My car is gone. Now bear in mind, I have keys to it. One other driver has keys to it. and our boss has keys to it. Nobody else has keys to that car, as far as we know. Now, I knew damn well the other driver would not have taken that car, especially without letting me know he was taking it, and the same was true for my boss. My boss wouldn't have taken the car without letting me know. I mean, they knew I had to pick a guy up early in the morning. They would have at least left me another car. If they had to take that car for some reason, they would have left me another car. They wouldn't have just taken the car. So, and left me with nothing to drive. Anyway, I had to be in Lanark at, I had to be in like at 5 in the morning or whatever to pick this guy up, or 4 or something. I forget. I think it was 5. But it's like 20 after 4 when I came down the stairs. I may get my times all flubbed up. It was a long time ago, and I'm not great with numbers. When I start talking about numbers, I tend to flub things up quite a bit. Anyway, I had to be there at the top of the hour, and it was 20 minutes into that hour that I go downstairs and the car isn't there. There's just an empty space where the car was. So now I'm panicking. What the hell happened to my car? And of course, I'm beating myself up. I'm thinking, did I leave a door unlocked? Did I maybe make a mistake where it would have been easier to steal the car, or what? Like, what the hell happened to my car? But I didn't have time to worry about that right then. I had a job to do. Of course, I had the keys to all the other cars. So I literally ran across town to the gas station, which was closed. There's nobody around at that hour. But the 81 Chev Impala and another one of the cars was parked around back. So I hop into the 81 Impala. I decide I'll use that car. And start it up. And now I go to Lanark. I pick the guy up, get him to work on time. When I got back to the gas station, by the time I got back to the gas station, it was open. And so I go in there. I tell my boss what's happened. I tell him that the Buick has been taken. It's gone, And I call the Perth police and I report it stolen. And now for the rest of the day, I'm driving the 81 Chev Impala, and I'm beating myself up. I feel terrible because I've lost the car. That car was entrusted to me, and I lost it. That was an awful feeling. Well, at around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, who pulls in driving my car but the fellow that was claiming that he was running a construction company and all that had sodomized his little boy. By that time I knew what he had done, and I'll tell you how I found out what he did anyway. But first I'm going to tell you the rest of this story. I came out of that gas station in a blind rage. Like, I do have a temper, and when I was young especially, I'm not somebody to fool around with when I was young, at all. And I already didn't like this guy. And, I knew this thing about him, and I couldn't tell anybody, and it was just killing me. And that was on top. I took a dislike to him within a very short time of meeting him. But because I knew there was something up with him, he was fake. He was putting on an image that wasn't him, and I knew that, and that made me wonder what he was hiding. Then I found out what he was hiding. Anyway, I remember before he could even get out of the car, I had the car door open, and I'm hauling him up out of the car by his throat. And I'm yelling at him, what the hell do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea the trouble you have caused? And I said, and how did you get a key to this car anyway? Well, it turns out he had been sent out somewhere in that car on one of my very few days off. I very seldom had a day off, but I had a day off, and I left the car there at the gas station to be used, because it was to be used for business. It wasn't my personal car. And they had let him drive it that day, and he had went up to Canadian Tire, which is a big kind of a hardware store, an automotive supply store we have here in Canada. There's a chain of them right across the country. And he had made a key for the car. And then he'd come and taken the car. Well, I said, well, where the hell were you all day with this car? Well, he said, I had to go up to Smiths Falls to such and such a construction site and boss around my men. And of course, that just, like, okay, bullshit. Get the hell out of the car. And I said, now you go in there and you call the Perth police and you ask for Sergeant Doug Cox. You tell Doug Cox what you've done, and you get this car off the stolen vehicle registry. Because I said, I can't drive this now, because if I drive this thing, if a cop sees it, I'm going to be hauled out of it at gunpoint, because it's now on the stolen car registry. So I said, it's a stolen car. I said, you're lucky that no cop saw you driving it today, because that's what would have happened. Anyway, how I found out what he had done is I knew a lady who worked for social services. And she was asking me, I was visiting with this woman one time, and she asked me how things were going driving the cab. And I was telling her, well, I got this coworker, there's something off about him, and I don't know, and, he does all these things. Well, the other thing that he was doing is we were between an elementary school and a corner store. There was a corner store beside the gas station we worked out of. And there was an elementary school that only went up to grade 8. And he would stand in the window of the gas station and he would check out the little girls as they walked by. These are little girls that were, in grade 1 and 2 and 3. They're walking past our gas station to go to the corner store to buy candy or whatever, with their money or whatever to buy candy. And you'd see them go up past there on the sidewalk, and they'd go into the store, and he'd be checking them out. He'd be standing in the window there, and this was a very small room, and I'd be sitting there, and he'd be standing there in the window. I'd be reading the newspaper or whatever, and he'd be standing there in the window. And there'd be the girl that was dispatching the cabs and pumping gas. She'd be in there, and sometimes there'd be somebody else in there. And he'd be standing there, really checking them out, saying, oh, that one's got a nice ass. And he'd be talking about a 6-year-old. And I used to say, do you hear this guy? I'd say this to the others in the room. Sometimes there'd be another driver in there or whatever. Do you hear this guy? Do you hear what he's saying? And they'd say, what's he saying? You don't hear him. Do you not hear what this guy is saying? And no, they just would say, oh, no, what are you talking about? No. It was like I was the only one that could hear him. It was weird, but anyway, how I found out what happened is this woman who worked for social services, when I said his name, she did a double take. She said, oh my God, he's driving a taxi? Well, yeah, I said he is. And she said, oh, he shouldn't be driving a taxi. He should not be driving a taxi. And she told me, she said, he's crazy. And she said, he sodomized his 2-year-old son. He should not be driving a taxi. He's a sex offender. Well, see, I know. And she said, and you can't tell anybody this because I'll get into trouble because he's entitled to privacy. So here I was anyway, with that secret. But anyway, I'll give you an example of some of the dirty tricks that were played on me, though, by the local police. And the same cop that wouldn't give me my taxi license did this, and yet gave this guy who had sodomized a 2-year-old boy, his own son, his taxi license, but fought to keep me from getting mine, which I did eventually get it, but I had to fight for it. I got called to a house party one Saturday afternoon. Now, we used to do alcohol deliveries, so I was told to deliver a bottle to this house party. I was told what to get. So it was some kind of whiskey. I can't remember now. I'm not a drinker. And it's a long time ago now. It was 1990. But anyway, I go to the liquor store, go to the liquor control board store. I buy the alcohol, whatever it was. I drive it over there. It's obvious there's a party going on in the house. You can hear music and everything. I knock on the door, and this kid answers. He looked to be 14 or 15 years old. He was obviously not old enough to accept the bottle. He wasn't old enough to have it. So I told him, I said, I can't give this to you. Is there anybody in there who is old enough to accept this bottle and can prove it? Well, no, he said, there's not. And I said, well, I got to take it back. I can't give it to you. I got to take it back. And he starts begging me. He says, "Oh, come on, man, be cool. Be cool. Be a cool dude. Don't do this to me. Let me have the bottle, man. Don't be like that. Let me have the bottle. You want to be cool, don't you? Like that." And I said, "Look, I have no interest in being cool." I said, "I have an interest in not, giving you this bottle when you're not of age to accept it." I said, "That's my interest." So I said, "I got to take it back to the store." I said, "I'm sorry, but it just is what it is." And I said, "You guys kind of wasted my time today, really." I said, "You're lucky I'm not charging you for the trip over here." So I anyway, but I said, "You can't have it. There's nobody in the house that can accept it. You obviously can't accept it. You can't have it." So I put the bottle under my coat. I had it in a bag, in a paper bag from the liquor control board store. I put it under my jacket, and I turn around, and I'm walking back to my car. Well, the cop, Dan Sisti, comes flying out of the backyard, comes running up on me, grabs a hold of me, and says, "I got you now, you son of a bitch." And I'm looking at him. I said, "You got me for what?" He says, "You just sold alcohol to minors." And I pulled the bottle out of my coat, and I held it up in front of him. I said, "No, I didn't." Took it out of the bag enough that he could see it, put it back in the bag, put it back into my coat. I said, "No, I didn't." Well, he let me go, and he started roaring the F word over and over again. And I walked away from him, got into my car, and drove away, and he was dancing around in the yard, roaring the F word. So, that's what I was up against anyway in my town, in my hometown. I had to deal with stuff like that all the time. But anyway, those are just some stories anyway from my taxi driving days. It was a miserable job. I would never do it again. It takes a certain kind of person to do that job, and I'm just not that kind of person. Eventually, knowing what this guy had done, and I was suspecting anyway there was something wrong with him that way, because I saw how he was checking out the little girls going past, and no normal man is commenting about the physical attributes of a 6 or 7-year-old child, a little girl like that. So I knew there was something not right about him. But then I had that secret, and I couldn't tell anybody, and it was driving me crazy. And the lady that I knew actually went to our boss and told him anyway, just had a quiet talk with him and told him. So then there was just no more work for that guy after that, that's all. But, and that was a relief anyway, to get him off of that job, where he would be alone in vehicles with children. But, yeah, it was bad anyway. And then, of course, they all thought I was picking on him because I was the way I was with him. And I couldn't tell them. Right from the start, even, I didn't like the guy, but then I really didn't like him. And, of course, taking my car and causing me all that kind of trouble, that didn't go over well either. I was in a panic, and then I felt bad. when I went out there and the car was gone, it's like, where the hell did my car go? Like, it's an 84 Buick LeSabre. It doesn't just disappear. It's a big car. It stands out. Like, where is it? Freaking chrome and, I mean, where the hell is my big, heavy, old boat of a car? You know? It was a beautiful car, actually. It was a really nice car. But it wasn't really all that old at the time either. That was 1990, and it was an '84, so it wasn't really all that old. But like I say, it was a big, big car though, and I mean it stood out. Even back then, it was still an era of big cars back then, but this car stood out because it was big and it had so much chrome on it and stuff. It was a really pretty car. And so, yeah, it was noticeable when I went out there and there was an empty space where the car had been. And of course, my first thought is, where the hell's the car? What happened to the car? And then my next thought is, I gotta run now over to the gas station and get another car. Luckily, like I say, I had the keys. I was able to do it. And I did get the guy to work on time. And when people are relying on you like that to get them to work, they could lose their job if you're late. Because if you're late, you'll make them late. So you can't do that. You got to be on time. And if they have an appointment, with you or whatever, if you have an appointment to pick them up so that you can get them to work, you damn well better be there when you're supposed to be there.